you've clicked on this video, that means you want to know exactly what is my process for drawing portrait planes. Well, don't worry, because that's exactly what you'll be getting in this video. I'll be sharing with you my methods, my mistakes that I've made along the way, and my biggest takeaways from this study. So whether you're a beginner or an experienced artist, make sure to stick around because I'm sure that you'll learn a thing or two. Man, I can already see the people in the comments being like, hey, I didn't learn anything, just banana. Anyways, it's just Banana here, and welcome back to another video of my portrait drawing journey. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, my process starts with tracing on top of the reference. This is a crucial step in every sort of study, so make sure that you do not skip this step. I first start off by drawing the basic construction of the face using the Loomis method. Now, this tracing part will help us later on when we move on to making the smaller planes on the tracing, but also when we move on to the freehand later on. The tracing helps you by allowing you to see the correct drawing of the portrait before you actually go into drawing it freehand by yourself. It allows you to measure, get the angles correct, and get all the different features placed in the correct spot. So do not skip your tracing. This is pretty important. You want to be making your lines as clean as you possibly can, because that will help you determine the correct angles and proportions of the lines and features later on when you're adding the planes. What does that mean? That means that you're going to be using a lot of the eraser and a lot of the Ctrl-Z. You're going to be erasing lines, rebuilding them, redrawing them, erasing them again, and then redrawing them again. Another crucial thing to remember is that you have to pay attention to perspective in this basic construction. This is very crucial later on when we're going to be adding the planes. So in this case, I had a couple troubles to deciding where this guy's features are going to be angled, but then I remembered that the horizon line will actually be placed where our eye level is. And if you look at this picture, we can actually see that the picture was taken a little bit below him, which means that the horizon line will be below his face. So all the features will be angling down. So make sure to pay attention to this in your own references that you're using so that you actually know the right perspective later on. Because if you get the perspective all wrong, it will affect you massively later on when we're going to be adding planes. Moving on to the actual planes part of the tracing, a little disclaimer here before we start, I'm not going to be going fully in depth on each feature's planes in this section, as I covered them more in depth in other videos, which you can check out on the top of your screen. But with that being said, now that I had the basic construction of the head all figured out, it was time to start adding planes to the head. Some crucial things to remember here is that you want to be even more meticulous with your lines as we are drawing smaller planes as opposed to the bigger, more forgiving basic construction of the head where we're drawing bigger shapes. Also, don't get attached to any of your lines. Like in the previous phase, make sure to use the eraser and Ctrl-Z to remove lines and redraw them as you see fit. Now, personally, I find that the arch of the jaw and the cheekbone area is a little bit of a problematic area for me, so I had to go in and redraw them a couple of times before I was actually happy with them. So that means that I used the eraser, I used Ctrl-Z a lot, I faded the lines, I draw them again, you know, all that process over and over until I was really happy with how the tracing actually turned out and how the cheekbone area turned out. Another problem that I had starting off when drawing portraits is that I would get too attached to a line that I drew. So I would just draw a line and I didn't really want to erase it because I was like, well, you know, it's like already there. Don't get attached to any of your lines, guys. Do not get attached to any of your lines. You're simply building out the tracing. You're not actually drawing. So make sure if your line feels like it should be a little bit to the right, feels like it should be a little bit to the left, or if it's just completely off, make sure to erase it, fade it, build it up again. Do whatever you gotta do to make sure that that line is exactly where you want it to be. So after I have the tracing all figured out, it's time to move on to draw the actual freehand version of the portrait. Yet again, I'm going to be drawing a basic construction of the head with a sort of Loomis method that a bit changed for the purposes of the Doodle Warriors course, but should be relatively the same. In this part, I'm going to be using a lot of different techniques for measuring the proportions and the perspective of the drawing, such as using guidelines for the proportions, using the stylus to measure the angles, and finally, if all else fails, I'm going to take the freehand that I draw and drag it on top of the tracing so that I can see what mistakes that I make. Just make sure that if you do this, you're not going to be fixing the mistakes on top of the tracing. Make sure to drag it back and then fix the mistakes. Now, everybody's going to have mistakes of their own. So whether you're going to be drawing the nose too big, the eyes too small, your lines are not going to be clean enough, everybody's going to be having some sort of problem that they're going to have to face in order to make a good basic construction. For me, it was making the chin a little bit too angled and making eyes that were too ovally instead of round, which is now something that I'm constantly thinking about as I'm actually drawing the lay-in. So pay attention to any mistakes that you make and make sure to fix them the next time that you're drawing a portrait. Okay, now we got the tracing all figured out, we got a basic construction on the freehand, and it's time to move on to actually drawing planes on the freehand version. So when you're drawing planes, I like to zoom in a little bit more so that I can see the smaller planes, and also use a smaller brush so that I can be a little bit more precise when drawing these planes. Still, however, I don't want to be zoomed in too much because I still want to be thinking about the entire head as a whole instead of just thinking about the planes of each features. Also, please draw both of the eyes at the same time so that your eyes look actually the same and proportionate to each other, and you don't have to draw in one eye and then draw the entire other eye and make sure that it fits in perfectly with the first one that you draw. So please, for your own safety and for your own well-being, please draw both two eyes at the same time. Other than that, you can and you probably should use guidelines and other proportion measuring techniques that I've talked about previously in this video to draw the planes of the features. Now, hopefully, after all this measuring and all this drawing, you will arrive at something that looks something like this drawing right here that I did, or something even better, who knows. And if not, just remember that it will take time and practice. And I know it definitely did to me, because if you look at the drawing that I did first time and this drawing, you will probably see a little bit of improvement from my previous drawings. So this is it for this week. I'm super excited to share with you what will happen in my next part of my journey. And if you're just as excited as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you'll be the first one to get notified when I release my next video. Or well, if it's already out, be out on your screen right now as always. That's it for this video. Thank you all for your support, truly appreciate it. And I'll see you all in the next week. Peace.